All right, so chapter 3 is what we're going to begin to read today. It's called Beast on the Nile, chapter 3. All aboard, said Charles. The English couple led the way across a short gangplank onto the deck of their sailboat. The boat had a long cabin and a tall mast with a furled sail. 2 crew members in white clothes were mopping the deck. Miss Selina, one called. Lord and Lady Bickerson are waiting inside to visit with Miss Florence. Oh, no, I didn't know they were coming, Selina said under her breath. Charles stopped and stroked his mustache. Excuse me, my dear, he said, but while those particular folks are aboard, I believe I shall take a stroll. Pleasure to meet you, Jack and Annie. He tipped his hat, then retreated back down the gangplank. Coward, called Selina. Charles turned and saluted her from the riverbank. Do give my best to the Bickersons, darling. Ta-ta, he said, and took off. Who are the Bickersons? Asked Annie. Selina sighed. Lord and Lady Bickerson are aristocrats from London, she said. They're friends of Florence's family. Come and meet them, brave American children. It might be good for your education. The boat rocked gently on the calm water as Jack and Annie followed Selina across the deck. Aristocrats, Annie whispered to Jack. That's like royalty, right? Sort of, said Jack. We have to act proper. No problem, said Annie. We've hung out with Empress Maria Theresa of Austria and King Philip II of Macedonia. Well, yeah, don't mention that to anyone, said Jack. Duh, said Annie. Selina stopped in front of one of the cabin doors and took a deep breath. Are you ready? She asked Jack and Annie. Yes, said Jack, eager to get out of the heat and away from the flies. Selina opened the door and motioned for Jack and Annie to follow her. They walked into a small sitting room with green paneled walls and dark woodwork. It took a moment for Jack's eyes to adjust to the shadowy room. It was much cooler inside than outside, but the red-faced man and woman sitting stiffly on straight-backed chairs were both fanning themselves frantically. Lord and Lady Bickerson, hello. I'm sorry that Florence is not here right now. I'm sure she will be back soon, said Selina. But in the meantime, please meet Jack and Annie from America. Hello, Jack said with a bow. Greetings, my lord. Greetings, my lady, Annie said with a curtsy. The aristocrats barely nodded. They fanned themselves harder. Have a seat, children, said Selina. Jack and Annie sat on the edge of the sofa. Jack tried to keep his back as straight as he could. When he saw Lady Bickerson scowl at his hat, he quickly pulled it off. How are your lordship and ladyship today? Asked Selina. The 2 aristocrats spoke at once. Terrible and wretched, said Lord Bickerson. Burning up, said his wife. Oh, I'm so sorry, said Selina. But Jack noticed she didn't sound sorry at all. We saw a dreadful beast this morning, said Lady Bickerson. A dreadful beast? Selina repeated. Yes, a crocodile, said Lord Bickerson. And a servant told us a hippopotamus was spotted upriver yesterday. Nile hippos kill people, you know. And Egyptian jackals have been seen recently, too. They come out at night and slay small animals. He looked at Jack and Annie. They have even been known to attack children. Furthermore, our servants have been telling us about the snakes in Egypt, said Lady Bickerson. The black mamba, for instance. One bite from that monster contains enough poison to kill 20 people. Oh my, let's hope, began Selina. Of course, the biggest killer in this land is the vicious little mosquito, Lord Bickerson interrupted. Egyptian mosquitoes can carry terrible diseases. Malaria, for one, fever, coma, death. Oh, such misery, said Selina. Yes, aren't we all terribly miserable and frightened in Thebes? Said Lady Bickerson. Actually, I'm not miserable or frightened, Annie said thoughtfully. We saw a crocodile today, too, but it was harmless. She smiled at Lord and Lady Bickerson. They stared back at Annie as if she were a little mosquito. Suddenly, a servant threw open the door, stood at attention, and spoke in a loud voice. Countess von Kinsky. A glamorous-looking woman draped in a red silk shawl bustled in. Her dark hair was piled high on her head. On her shoulder was a tiny monkey. The monkey looked like a little elf with a wrinkled face, big pointed ears, and bushy eyebrows. "Oh, look, it's so cute," cried Annie. Countess von Kinsky, "I believe you have met Lord and Lady Bickerson?" said Selina. "Oh, yes," said the Countess, nodding to the Bickersons, "but neither Koku nor I have met these lovely children. Who are you?" "Jack and Annie from America," said Annie. "Delightful," said the Countess. "Jack and Annie, this is Koku von Kinsky. I am from Budapest, Hungary, but she is a baby baboon from the Sudan in Africa. Koku, say hello." As the Countess leaned forward toward Jack and Annie, Koku grabbed Jack's ear with her tiny fingers and yanked hard. "Ow!" Jack said. The baby baboon grinned as if she thought Jack was funny. "Koku, no, no," said the Countess, pulling Koku's hand from Jack's ear. "A big no-no," thought Jack, rubbing his ear. "Oh, woo," said the baboon, looking at Jack with her big eyes. "Oh, woo yourself," said Annie, laughing and reaching out to pet Koku. "Careful, child, she'll bite you," said Lord Bickerson. "Excuse me, my lord, but my darling Koku never bites," said the Countess. The look on the Bickerson's face grew even more sour as Annie rubbed the baboon's spiky-haired little head. Koku stared at Annie with bright, curious eyes, then let out a shrill screech. Annie screeched back at her. Everyone laughed except, of course, the aristocrats, who now glared at Annie and Koku as if they were both little mosquitoes. Before the Bickersons could speak, the door opened again. A tall, slender woman stepped inside, clutching a notebook. She was breathless, sunburned, and smiling. But her smile quickly turned to a look of dismay when she saw all the visitors. "Florence, finally!" exclaimed Selina. So that must be Florence Nightingale right here. Here's the monkey. And then here's Mr. and Mrs. Bickerson. And you see Jack and Annie. Florence Nightingale wore a plain gray dress. Her brown hair was parted in the middle. "Hello, Florence, my dear," Lord Bickerson said. "Please sit down." Florence took a seat, then smiled politely. "Greetings, my lord, my lady," she said. Her eyes softened as they rested on the Countess and the baby baboon. "Hello, Countess. How is our little Koku today?" "Very happy," said the Countess. "She has just made 2 wonderful new friends from America." She nodded towards Jack and Annie. "Oh, hello," said Florence. "Hello," said Jack. Annie couldn't speak. She just stared at Florence with wide eyes and a big grin. "Flo, this is Jack and Annie," said Selina. "They want to meet you." Florence looked puzzled. "But why?" she said. "For some reason they believe you are a world-famous nurse who works in hospitals," said Selina. Florence looked curiously at Jack and Annie. "A world-famous nurse?" she said. "How strange." "Strange indeed," said Lady Bickerson with a snort. "Work in a hospital. It's unthinkable." "Unthinkable, my lady?" said Florence. "Well, your mother and father would certainly find it so," Lord Bickerson said huffily. A sad expression crossed Florence's face as she looked back at Jack and Annie. "No, children," she said, "I am not a world-famous nurse. In fact, I have never, not even for one day, worked in a hospital. My family would find it unthinkable." Selina jumped in to change the subject. "What Flo really loves is taking notes about the Egyptian ruins," she said to Jack and Annie. "That's why we make such wonderful travel companions. She loves to take notes and I love to sketch. Tell our guest about your morning, Flo." "I was at the Temple of Luxor," said Florence, brightening. "I studied the paintings, particularly the ones of hang on, the page just flipped. Anubis." "Anubis," said Jack. "The jackal god," said Florence. "He is on many tomb walls. Ancient Egyptians believed jackals protected the dead. I find that so fascinating." "That is fascinating," said Annie. Lady Bickerson shuddered. "Ugh, I find it gruesome," she said. "It's not gruesome at all, my lady," said Florence. "I find Egyptian mythology to be quite beautiful." "I think so too," said Jack. Beautiful, said Lord Bickerson. I don't see how one could find anything in this land beautiful, Florence. I cannot imagine why you would want to prowl among those ghastly ruins. Nor I, said Lady Bickerson. They all stink of rats and decay. Oh, speaking of rats, said the Countess, Cuckoo and I saw one in our cabin last night. Neither of us could sleep a wink after that. We never sleep, said Lady Bickerson, not with the rats and flies and fleas, and that dreadful singing from our crew hurts my ears. I'm sorry you find everything so distasteful in this land, my lady, said Florence. It makes me wonder why you and your lordship ever chose to travel to Egypt in the first place. Why, these days it's considered quite fashionable to visit Egypt, said Lady Bickerson. Though now Lord Bickerson and I can't possibly understand why. Oh, I adore Egypt, Florence said, and I feel I must defend her. Egypt and I quite agree with each other. Indeed, said Lord Bickerson. You adore Egypt? She agrees with you, and you feel you must defend her? You certainly seem to have an excellent opinion of yourself, Miss Nightingale. Florence took a deep breath. Then she said quietly, No, in truth, I do not have an excellent opinion of myself, my lord. I have an excellent opinion of you, Annie whispered. Oh, I have an excellent opinion of you, Annie whispered. An awkward silence filled the room. Forgive me, said Florence. I am not feeling well. I must retire to my own cabin. I fear I must. And with that, Florence Nightingale rose from her chair and slipped soundlessly out of the room. Chapter 4 is called Baboon Babysitters. I wonder if that's what this picture is. You see Jack and Annie with the baboon? Uh-oh. So they're supposed to be babysitting the baboon. Looks like they go on adventures. Everyone was silent for a moment after Florence left. The Bickersons were the first to speak. Well, said Lady Bickerson. How utterly rude, said Lord Bickerson. Excuse me for a moment while I check on Flo, said Selina, a worried look on her face. Perhaps the heat was too much for her today. And with that, Selina left the sitting room too. Well, said Lady Bickerson again. I hope I did not offend Miss Nightingale by complaining about the rat, said the Countess. I like her very much. Miss Nightingale, I mean, not the rat. You do know Florence as we do, said Lord Bickerson. You have no idea of the trouble she has caused her family. It's shocking, said Lady Bickerson. She refuses to behave like a lady. She is full of her own thoughts and opinions. She tells her poor mother she has dreams to leave home so she can work. What's wrong with that? Asked Annie. Uh-oh, thought Jack. Annie sounded angry. No proper lady works out in the world, Lord Bickerson snapped. Why not? Asked Annie. I mean, if you wanted to follow your dreams and people wouldn't let you, wouldn't you feel bad too? And what's wrong with having thoughts and opinions? I have thoughts and opinions all the time. What a rude child you are, said Lady Bickerson. Is that how your parents taught you to speak to your superiors? Jack was starting to get angry too. We don't have superiors at home, he said. Lord Bickerson glared at Jack and Annie. It is high time you children left this boat, he said. Miss Nightingale does not even know who you are. None of us know who you are or who your parents are. Excuse me, sir, but this is not your boat, is it? Annie said. I thought it belonged to Selina and Charles. Ew, the aristocrats both gasped. Lord Bickerson strode to the door. Begone, he said. You children are the very definition of the word impolite. Leave before I send the local governor. He'd know what to do with you. Seriously? What does that mean? Said Jack. It means go, said Annie, which I'm happy to do. Me too, said Jack. Jack and Annie stood up as they headed for the door. Annie looked back at the Countess and her baby baboon. Goodbye, Countess. Goodbye, Cuckoo. It was great meeting you. Jack nodded in agreement. Must you leave? Said the Countess. I fear we must, said Annie, echoing Florence. She curtsied and Jack bowed. Then they both headed out the door. Outside, the sun was brighter and hotter than ever. Flies buzzed everywhere. Jack put his hat back on. Come on, let's get away from these beasts, he said. The flies or the aristocrats, said Annie. Both, said Jack. Jack and Annie headed over the gangplank to the river bank. then walked towards some shade trees at the edge of the Nile. "Send for the local governor? Seriously," said Jack. "Their behavior was unthinkable," said Annie. "The very definition of impolite." Jack laughed, but then he sighed. "We blew it," he said. "We got sidetracked. How can we complete our mission now?" "Don't worry, we'll wait for the Bickersons to leave," said Annie. "Then we'll try to get back on board and visit with Florence." "Okay, sounds like a plan, sort of," said Jack. "Come on, let's wait on that big rock under the trees," said Annie. Jack and Annie headed toward the shady rock. Not far away, Mustafa was sitting next to his rowboat reading a book. The guide looked up, gave them a nod, then went back to his reading. Across the river, Ali was resting with his donkeys. "Could you believe the way those two talked about Florence?" said Annie. "She can't be a nurse. She can't work outside her house. She can't even have her own opinions. How do you become a great if people make you feel so bad about yourself? And did you notice how they tried to make us afraid of everything? That was crazy." "Yeah, crazy," said Jack. But the aristocrat's warnings had gotten to him. Now he was on alert for all the beasts of the Nile. What do black mambas look like, he wondered. Do jackals ever come out during the day? When he heard the whine of a mosquito, he shook his head as if his hair were on fire. "What's wrong with you?" said Annie. Before Jack could answer, he heard a loud call. "Wahoo!" Jack and Annie jumped up and whirled around. "Cuckoo!" cried Annie. The baby baboon was scrambling toward them on all fours. Countess von Kinsky hurried after her. "Cuckoo, wait!" she called. Cuckoo leapt into Annie's arms. "Well, hello!" cried Annie, hugging the baby baboon. So here they are on the bank of the Nile. Do you see the little monkey? "She wanted to find you," the Countess said, out of breath. "After you left, she screeched at the Bickersons. She even shook her little fist, so they ordered her off the boat too. Now the poor couple is sitting there all alone." "Oh, thank you, Cuckoo, for sticking up for us," said Annie. "I can see you like Cuckoo and that she likes you," said the Countess. "Therefore, I have a favor to ask you. Could you care for her this afternoon? I must take a ferry down river to see a sick friend, but I cannot take Cuckoo. My friend is afraid of creatures from the wild." "Of course we'll take care of her," said Annie. Annie, you know we have a mission, right?" Jack said under his breath. Their job was to find a secret of greatness, not to babysit a baboon. "Don't worry, Cuckoo won't get in the way," Annie said to Jack. She looked at the Countess. "We'd love to." Thank you very much. I trust you to be wonderful caretakers," said the Countess. She reached into her purse, brought out a chunk of brown bread, and gave it to Jack. "Please give her bites of this when she is hungry or sad. I won't be back until nightfall. Where can we rendezvous then?" "Rendezvous?" said Annie. "Yes, meet up with each other," said the Countess. "Oh, how about Selina's boat?" said Jack. Good. You two are angels who dropped from heaven. Thank you so very much," said the Countess. "Be good, Cuckoo." And she hurried down the riverbank to catch her ferry. "Oh," said Cuckoo, looking after the Countess. "Don't be sad, baby," said Annie, sitting on the rock. "Your mom won't be gone long." "Ah-woo," the baboon said. She settled into Annie's lap and Annie kissed her head. "Would Cuckoo like a snack?" Jack asked. He broke off a piece of bread and gave it to her. He put the rest in his pouch. Cuckoo held the bread with her two tiny hands. She chewed thoughtfully, looking from Jack to Annie with her bright eyes. She uttered funny little noises between bites. Suddenly, she screeched and pointed upriver. Jack and Annie turned to look. Florence had left Charles and Selina's boat. Carrying a small bag, she was walking quickly down the riverbank towards Mustafa. "Now's our chance," Jack said. "Let's go," said Annie. Holding Cuckoo, she hurried with Jack to Florence and the guide. "I'd like to explore the Valley of the Queens," Florence said to Mustafa as Jack and Annie approached. "Hi there," said Annie. Florence turned around. She looked startled. "Oh, hello," she said. Cuckoo let out another screech. "We're babysitting Cuckoo," Annie explained. Florence nodded. Jack could tell she didn't really want to talk to them. Are you going to take more notes this afternoon? Annie asked. Yes, I am, Florence answered. You're just like Jack, said Annie. He loves to write in his notebook, too. Oh, how nice, said Florence. Jack was embarrassed. Florence's mind was clearly on other things. She nodded politely and then turned back to the guide. Shall we be off, Mustafa? Mustafa helped Florence into the rowboat and took his position. As the guide picked up his oars, Florence glanced back at Jack, Annie, and Kaku. They were all just standing on the bank staring at her. Florence sighed. Do you need a ride to the western shore? She said. Yes, please, said Annie. Then come, Florence said. You are welcome to join us. Thanks, said Annie. Jack didn't say anything. He didn't feel welcome at all. Jack and Annie climbed in with Kaku and sat behind Florence. Mustafa used his oars to push the boat off the riverbank. As he began rowing across the Nile, the white-bearded guide sang the same peaceful song he'd sung before. Annie gave Jack a thumbs-up sign. Not really, Jack thought. Florence was sitting with her back to them now, writing in her notebook. How could they ever get her to pay attention to them? Look up Valley of the Queens, Annie whispered to him. Jack took the handbook out of the pouch on his belt. Then he and Annie read silently read. About 3,000 years ago, the wives of the pharaohs were buried in the Valley of the Queens, near the Valley of the Kings. The tombs were cut out of limestone cliffs. Excuse me, Miss Nightingale, Annie said. Have you ever been to the Valley of the Queens? Without looking back, Florence shook her head. We find it fascinating, said Annie. She nudged Jack, letting him know it was his turn to speak. Did you know that the wives of the pharaohs were buried there about 3,000 years ago? Jack said. I believe their tombs were cut out of limestone cliffs. Florence barely nodded. She didn't say a word or look back at them. Before Jack or Annie could think of another way to get her attention, the rowboat arrived on the western shore. All right, that's the end of chapter 4. What do you think is Florence's problem? Do you think that she really does love to explore, but maybe she's really wishing she could do something else? And Jack and Annie, I wonder if their mission is to go there and help her feel better about herself, to gain some confidence. Sometimes we don't believe in ourselves, and there are people around us that help us, that speak words of truth and an encouragement into our lives. So I kind of wonder if that's what Jack and Annie are there for. Maybe that's their mission, so that she will go on and do great things. All right, well, that's chapter 3 and 4. I hope you enjoyed it, and we will come back together and read 2 more chapters the next time. Happy reading. Bye.